I would like to say I squachel. Good day to everybody. I quanas kuanung etla. It's good to see you all. My Sinchothan's a little rusty. Haishka CM to Elder Douglas the Fortune and to the woman he calls his girlfriend, Kathy Horn. And Haishka Asquam CM for the good words, Haishka and Squale. Richard Wagamese said that all that we are is story. Harold Johnson said we are the stories we are told, and we are the stories we tell ourselves. To change our circumstances, we need to change our story, edit it, modify it, or completely rewrite it. Our being is story. Our essence is story. Our vision is shaped by story. Our hearing, our morals, our ethics are all story. The American teacher and storyteller Njoki McElroy says, storytelling is an act of love. Sharing stories connects us to each other. When I tell my story, it connects to your story. And back to Richard Wagamese again, who, by the way, was at UVic for 6 months as a Southam Fellow. He would say that when we learn each other's stories, we get bigger inside and we see each other. Alan Jones writes in his book, The Soul's Journey, we need stories that take note of our frailty and foolishness, yet honor our deepest longings and highest aspirations. We need stories that heal our wounded imaginations. And this morning, we are honored to have with us 3 writers whose work heals our wounded imaginations, whose stories have entered our beings and have enlarged and enlivened our worlds. The first person you see to my left is Richard Van Camp. Back in 2012, Richard was visiting here at UVic, and he told an audience that he would read anything that anyone gave him, and that he would critique it and give feedback. Our mutual friend, the writer Monique Gray Smith, sent him her first novel. Richard read it and emailed his thoughts to her right away, and Monique couldn't get over that this famous writer would do that, would not only take the time to read my work, but write and share feedback, and it changed the trajectory of her life. Richard is, like Esi Edugyan, a graduate of UVic writing, and in a lovely full circle moment, as Dr. Croft said, he's now the inaugural Indigenous storyteller in residence. Richard is Clicho Dene from Fort Smith, and Fort Smith is a deep wellspring for so many of his stories. He's the best-selling author of 30 books, the recipient of the Order of the Northwest Territories. He's teaching an online course about reclaiming family medicines, and I can only imagine that one of those medicines is story. So Richard joins us from Edmonton, and we're so happy that he's here.
Thank you, Sheila.
Mas I would also now like to introduce Esi Edugyan. In her novels Half-Blood Blues and Washington Black, Esi Edugyan makes space for people who are utterly extraordinary in times when history turned very dark, in times when history placed them at the bottom of the page as if they were footnotes. She has won the Giller Prize twice, and in the citation for the first time for Half-Blood Blues, the jury said, how often it is that history asks us to underestimate those trapped there. Well, not Esi. Esi Edugyan is a UVic alumna who received her bachelor degree from the Department of Writing. She's also taught here. Esi is the recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award as well. And her internationally best-selling novel, Washington Black, which also won the Giller Prize, was a finalist for other very significant book prizes, and so was Half-Blood Blues. And the New York Times and Barack Obama chose Washington Black as one of the best books of 2018, and it's going to be a series produced by Disney/Hulu and co-produced by Esi herself. And Esi didn't have long to come. She lives with her family here in Victoria. So welcome to Esi Edugyan. And then Lawrence Hill. All his life, whether as a journalist, a Massey lecturer, or a celebrated author, Lawrence Hill has used his platform to bring awareness, to challenge the status quo, to ask hard questions that must be answered, and then he questions the answers anew. He lives his commitment to building understanding, making positive change, excuse me, and getting us to talk to each other. Larry's written 11 books, including Beatrice and Croc Harry, The Illegal, and The Book of Negroes. His writing asks the reader to reflect on the past, the present, and the future, often all at the same time. As the Cree artist Kent Monkman puts it, past, present, future, all one word. Larry is keenly aware that without knowing where you come from, you cannot know who you are or how you will go into the future. Larry is an Uber volunteer. The list is long, trust me. He's also currently writing a novel about the African-American soldiers who built the Alaska Highway during World War II. His work has won many awards, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Rogers No Relation Writers' Trust Prize, Canada Reads, No Influence, and Canadian Screen Award. And he's a member of the Order of Canada, teaches creative writing at the University of Guelph, and is a resident of the Hammer, Hamilton, Ontario. So, welcome everybody, and forgive me, I'm going to have one big cough. Thank you. Always nice to advertise that. The format is going to be this. I'm going to ask one of our writers to start off by offering a story about how they became storytellers. And while I make my way to the chair, I'm going to start with you, Richard.
Sure. Was
there a story that ignited you to become a storyteller?
Absolutely. Let's give Shelagh Rogers a round of applause. Wow. Yay, Shelagh! Masi Cho! Haichka! Yay! I'll tell you, I'll open with a really beautiful story. It was a story that changed my life. You know, our dear friend David Robertson, we were having supper a little while ago at our friend Sarah Krotz's house in Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory, and he said something so profound. I think I've been looking for this line my whole life. He said, community is the answer to everything. He just said it, he spoke it, I felt it. I've repeated that so many times. And so growing up in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, I was born September 8, 1971. I'm a Virgo, very organized, you can tell. Anyways, so when I was growing up, we had the best in the 70s and the 80s. And can I just say to everybody right here, aren't you glad we were raised before the internet? Most of us? Because we had a true childhood. Culture, community, elders, stories. I mean, when Marlene Evans used to come and watch, remember Canada's first soap opera, The Edge of Night? Do you remember that? The Edge of Night? Yeah. 4:30, the whole town would come to a complete stop, and these Dene elders, Métis, Inuit, Gwich'in, Mountain Hare, Willow, Norse Levy, Dene Sutlane, Bush Cree, they would just sit and watch. Do you know how many little girls were called Raven? Because of The Edge of Night, because of that TV series. I mean, they were so, enamored by these Munyaos getting into trouble continuously. Anyways, so growing up in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories in the 70s and 80s, we had the best of the best. We had the best of the North. We also had the best of the South. I'm convinced we were pirating all the TV stations we weren't supposed to be having for free. So we were watching the Movie Channel, HBO, Cinemax. I mean, we had Good Rockin' Tonight with Stu Jeffrey, Degrassi Junior High. Do you know what I mean? And at the same time, we had our elders and the language and culture, and we were outside all the time. And when I was growing up, I didn't have what I needed the most, and that was a welcome into what it meant to be Tlicho Dene, what it meant to be a son of the North, what it meant to be Dene. I was a really good Canadian with a status card, and my own grandparents didn't speak a word of English. They were very powerful medicine people. And I always wondered growing up, why can't I just say to my grandfather, hey, I've got a hickey. What's the cure? Do we use an orange peel or silver little spoon in the freezer or crest? Like, what's the cure?
I guess you tried all of those things,
man.
Right?
Like, help me out, right? I could never just talk, and I always wondered why. Like, I felt like we were born into a shadow, and I didn't know what that shadow was. Like, why can't we speak our language, right? Why do we have to learn French? French is beautiful, but all my heroes are Cree. All my heroes are Métis. All my heroes are Inuit. All my heroes are Tlicho Dene. And so I know we live in an epidemic of loneliness. Remember before COVID, the Globe and Mail did a little interview and they said, how many Canadians are feeling lonely? This is before COVID. 3 out of 5 readers said that they didn't know how to break out of their rabbit trails. And I discovered something when I graduated from high school. And that is, if you are lonely and starving for community, volunteer. Lawrence Hills figured it out. Volunteer. Volunteer. And so when I graduated from PWK High in 1990, I said, I'm not going to go to NAIT or SAIT or U of A and pretend I know what I want. I'm tired of wasting time in a classroom. I'm going to volunteer and I'm going to be the handy bus driver. I'm going to volunteer and drive my elders around because I want to know the North. I want to be welcomed into tea and bannock sessions. I've been to more bingos than all you put together. I'll tell you that much. Anyways, I applied, I got it, and I was driving a 7-ton handy bus with a wheelchair lift. And I got to drive the creme de la creme, the matriarchs of our community. Seraphine Evans, her husband John, Dora Toronjo, Amelia Gatrix, Irene Sanderson, who kicked a black bear in the bum for trying to steal her fish. Yeah. And so I want you to write down my email. It's vancamprichard@gmail.com. Write this down, because I have a gift for all of you. You're all honored guests this morning. vancamprichard@gmail.com. This is important. So the story that changed my life forever. We had a Chipewyan elder. Her name was Maria Brown. She was a bush cook. She could cook for 20 or 200 at the drop of a hat. Her pies were legendary. Her bannock was legendary. Van Camprichard at Gmail. I know there's some Virgos in the room scrambling for a pen, and they're in agony, right? Van Camprichard. And if you forget, I'm on Facebook, and it's pretty easy to find me. Anyways, so Maria Brown was curing asthma in our community. Do you know how? Goose grease. Goose grease. Her father gave her that medicine power when she was 14 years old. And she said, the thing about Indian medicine, Richard, is it doesn't matter what the medicine is, it's who's giving you the medicine. It's who's giving you the medicine. She was curing asthma in our community. And I remember it was February, it was probably 1990, 1991, and it was probably 27 below, and I was driving Maria Brown to Kaiser's. I think it was Thursday. She was doing some shopping. We're going down McDougall, and she was about 5'1", and she was sitting behind me, and the handy bus was warm. The roads had just been cleared, right? And she goes, did I ever tell you about the time I died, Richard? And you know, I was probably 19, and I said, what? What? You died? And she goes, oh yes. I didn't tell you about the time I died and when I saw the other side? And I said, no. She goes, oh, I woke up a little while ago and I just wasn't myself. And I had so much that I needed to do and so much I wanted to do. And I thought, well, I'll just have a nap in my sewing room and then I'll have a coffee and a smoke and I'll get on with my day. And that's what I did. She goes, I curled up on my little cot and I had my little duvet and my pillow and I fell asleep. I actually passed away. I was dead for quite some time because when I woke up, my blood was slush. It took me a long time to get warm again. But what I'm going to tell you, Richard, is the truth. You want to know what heaven's like? And I'm driving and I'm like, I want to know what's heaven like. She goes, heaven's like West Edmonton Mall. Heaven's like West Edmonton Mall. There's floors. Everyone's visiting. Everyone's 24 in heaven. They're wearing suits, skirt, dresses, and the colors of the walls are like the northern lights. They never stay the same. Green, like a butterfly's wings. Like the northern light. Greens, blues, aquas, pinks. And I remember I fell asleep. And I remember I woke up in what I thought was a dream. And there were 2 women standing in front of me, and they were identical twins, and they had long hair like Crystal Gale. And they were standing there, and they were holding hands, identical twins. They were women. And they said, Maria, it's so good seeing you again, Maria. And I looked at these women, and I said, you girls, look at these walls. Look at how beautiful. Oh my God, if I could get some of this fabric, I could do my curtains. I could do my new pillowcases. Oh, look, it's changing again. It's changing. Oh my goodness, I need this fabric. How much are they asking for this fabric? Oh, here it comes. Changing again, changing. And they covered their mouths. They're very, very shy Dene women. They covered their mouths not to insult me. And they said, Maria, you don't need money here. And I said, yeah, right, as if they're not going to give. Oh, look, it's changing again. Look, it's changing again. And they said, Maria, you don't need money here because you're in heaven. And when I looked at them, the way they said it, I realized something. When I was a little girl, my two best friends were identical twins. They had long hair like me, and we lost them to sickness when they were quite young. And here they were, the first people to greet me on the other side. And when I looked around, I started to recognize the people that were visiting. And behind these women was a bridge. And on this bridge was my late mother, my late father, my late brother, and my late husband. And they're all waving and they're coming towards me. And when I saw them, I ran through those sisters. And to see my mom with black hair again, to see my brother strong, to see my father, and to see my husband. And they're all waving and they're coming towards me. And my husband, John Louis, she said, was a giant. And he went between my mom and my dad. He went like that and he just pushed them like nothing. And I remember my dad went down and he came up and he said, well, go get her then. Because those two were always joking around. And Jean Louis started going, babe, run, run. She said, I started running as fast as I could. And as I ran, a voice said, Maria Brown, you can't stay. You still have work. Maria Brown, you can't stay. You still have work. And she said, oh no, I'm not stopping. And she jumped up in the air and her husband was just getting ready to catch her. And the voice said, Maria, you can't stay. You still have work. She goes, I woke up. I was back in Fort Smith in my little cot under my duvet and my blood had turned to slush. I must have passed for quite some time. It took me a long time to get warm again. So, Richard, I'm not afraid of dying because I know why we're here. We're here to work. We're here to serve. We're here to help. When our work is done, we're called home. You want to know what heaven feels like, Richard? It's all love because you're home. So she told me that story in 1991.
And then what happened?
Well, the gift I want to give you all is I've spent my entire adult life recording elders. And what I did was I said to Maria Brown, this was the moment I knew why I was born. I said, Maria, do you know how many people need to hear this story? Do you know how much peace and comfort that would give the grieving, the heartbroken? I said, can I go to Radio Shack and buy a little James Bond tape recorder? Can I come to your house tomorrow? Can I record it? And I'll record you, and then I'll transcribe you word for word, and I'll print it up. My mom works at Uncle Gabe's Friendship Center. She's got a free printer. I'll print it up. I'll bring it back to you. You can go through everything. And if you want to change anything, you want to add anything, you can do that. And then I'll type it out for you. And then we'll go to the Arctic College. My dad works at Arctic College. And then we'll make photocopies. I'll make 50 photocopies. Let's just give it out for free. We could leave it at the back of the church, like for anyone who's really hurting. She said, sure, stop by tomorrow. We'll have bannock and coffee. You can record me. No word of a lie. I bought this little James Bond tape recorder. Remember this? When we had this? I don't know if you remember the macro cassette.
This is the birth of yours.
This is the one.
Yeah,
this is the one. So I bought it, and I'll wind down with this
Yeah.
by saying I bought this, and I recorded her in 1991. And if you go to Richard Van Camp SoundCloud, you can listen to that actual interview the next morning when I went back and I recorded her. So here's why I want you to write to me, and I don't want to hog the mic. Here's why I want you to write to me. Write to me at vancamprichard@gmail.com. I will send you 27 miracle stories that I've recorded from some of the greatest Indigenous storytellers of our time. Each one is a miracle. And that's the least that I can do for all of you today. Really honor the elders. So, Masi Cho, thank you very much.
Masi Cho to Richard Van Camp.
Well, Masi Cho, Maria Brown.
I will be asking Esi and Larry, too, about stories that mean a lot to them or stories that invited them into the world of telling stories or gave them permission to tell stories. But I think I want to pick up on something that Matt was saying, and it's very, very hard for us to escape the news. The news cycle is tumultuous, and it leaves us feeling very tender. And one of the working titles of this particular panel was Truth, Knowledge, and Society, the role of the author. And I guess what I would like to ask Larry or Esi is where do you go to find truth? What gives you a sense of something that will guide you that is real? Go ahead, Esi. Sure. Okay.
first off, I have to say it's always such a double-edged sword to be on a panel with you, Richard, because although you're the most sensational oral storyteller, it's always such a joy to hear you speak. It's you're an impossible act to follow.
What?
I have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just sitting here listening with such joy and such turmoil.
Thank you. Musty. Thank you.
Yeah, what gives me a sense of truth? It's almost, as a writer, it almost feels cliche to say this, but just returning to literature, returning to, I guess, what we would call the classics, but also, maybe other books that sit kind of beyond that. I remember when COVID first struck, everybody was reading The Plague. But I remember turning to 1984 then, and feeling like that gave me a sense of, not quite solace, but just a sense that, okay, he's showing us something about the world and the way that structures are in some sense artificial and the man-made sort of political structures that we put in place, how quickly they can disintegrate. And so that felt really consoling and eye-opening and terrifying all at once. But I do find myself just reaching back to see, maybe what others have written at times that feel like they contain some of the strains of what we're going through now. But I feel like this is very much a unique time in history, obviously. It's got its own contours, but we can see strains of the 1960s, we can see strains of the late 30s, early 40s. There's just so much going on. I remember a few months ago returning to the work of Richard J. Evans, who's a historian of World War II. In particular, his books, I guess The Coming of the Third Reich, these kinds of things, where he's sort of pointing towards the features in certain societies that could lead people towards such extremism. And I remember reading those books when I was writing my novel Half-Blood Blues, which was set in the late 30s in Germany and France. And really, this was back in maybe it was 2008 that I was doing this research, and not quite comprehending how, he describes sort of leftists and people on the right, having street battles, in the center of Berlin, how there would be these protests that inevitably descended into physical fighting, and this just seemed so alien. And now I feel very much like, okay, I can see how having, being so rooted in one's sense of, I guess, within one's idea of what our collective story is or should be, and cherry-picking features of history in order to bolster our own visions of the world, and how when these come into conflict, it can be just this cataclysmic thing. But then, reading these histories, you say, well, people got beyond this, and how did they get beyond it? And in a lot of cases, how people got beyond it was to go into full-on war. But this is not the case for all conflicts in history. So we can look to histories, we can look to to certain novels to see how it is that people have ultimately been able to negotiate a kind of dialogue or a truce where we're allowing, I guess, two warring visions or points of view to coexist. And I think about this a lot, like even in my own household. I had an argument with my husband the other day because he felt that I had said something that I was certain I hadn't said, and we had to have this whole sort of blowout about it. And I think the only way to resolve such things is to decide that you're not going to change somebody else's thinking. You're not going to be able to, you can state your case. You can have a bit of something that resembles maybe a bit of a trial. We always feel like we're two lawyers within our household duking it out to see whose narrative can be most convincing. But I think, especially with a long marriage, I think it's hard to sort of, to 100% convince somebody that their own vision is not correct or their own experience is not valid. And so the only way to peacefully coexist is to agree that, that each person is, that their truth is a truth that, although you don't agree with it, you can live with it. And we can coexist and we can hold these two very different visions. We can let them exist and that's okay. And I feel like that's something that could maybe be extended more widely to how we're all, discussing or coexisting within our own stories, which may be in conflict with each other, but which we have to say, okay, that's okay. That's okay. We can live with these stories without having to, go into a full-on battle to convince, because sometimes it's just not possible.
Larry, you passed it over to Esi. Where do you find, I guess, grounding at a time like this?
Well, grounding and truth. Can you hear me? Is the voice carrying?
It's coming. Your boost is coming.
I remember Sheila asking, "Whatever you do, don't give us Madonna mics." And so here we are. But can you hear me now? Is the voice carrying?
Oh dear.
No.
Yeah. We just need to get the mic picking up.
Well,
I'll
I'm giving
take-
you
yeah,
control.
That's a better
So-
idea. We can move around. Thanks.
There we go.
I want to say it's a real honor to share the stage with you, Sheila and Esi and Richard, and a big shout out and thanks to Jonathan and Matt and Rai and Kaylin and all the people who've worked so hard to bring us here today. It's an honor to be here. And I think truth and grounding are under attack today, and I can't think of a group of people who are more well-suited and knowledgeable and engaged to fight on behalf of truth and grounding than all people who engage in libraries and who care about them and who work in them. So this is a great room to find truth and grounding and encouragement. One of the many ways that it's under attack is, as a writer, I've noticed with regard to my peers and in my own case as well, that if you happen to be Indigenous or Black or queer or racialized, and you're writing honestly about your own lived experience, about the language that you've confronted since your childhood, whether you're writing in creative nonfiction or in fiction, there's a good chance that a school board will ban you because you're using the language that has for good or for bad, has defined you and marginalized you and boxed you in since your earliest days. And so many writers today who are writing openly and honestly with authentic language about their authentic experiences are now under attack and are being banned and having their books shelved. And it's not just Alberta and what's been in the news lately, it's Ontario and many other parts of the country too, not to mention what's happening south of the border. And so I think it's absolutely vital that librarians and all those who love libraries stand together and fight to defend truth and grounded, honest, authentic expression. I do want to share a couple quick stories, if I could, about how I came to this and how I came to write and the early gifts that came to me. And I'll just quickly mention a couple. And of course, they go back to my own parents, who were American immigrants to Canada, who married interracially and moved to Toronto the day after they married in D.C. in 1953. And my father was, he'd been a soldier in the U.S. Army in World War II, and he was a scholar. He was a sociologist, and I was so fascinated by the way he swung back and forth between, a soldier's vocabulary and talking like a sociologist at the University of Toronto, where he got his degree. And the code switching entranced me and really excited me about the possibilities of language, to hear a person move so quickly in a sentence from some down-hole soldier talk to sounding like a scholar. And that code switching really excited me about the possibilities of language and joy and the play of words. And he took me to the Don Mills Public Library, where I grew up. Don Mills, a suburb of Toronto. And I was terrified at first in entering the library as a 6-year-old, because I thought that I had to read every book in the library. That was your obligation when you enter the library. You have to read every book. And he reassured me that that wasn't the case, and I just became an addict of the Don Mills Public Library, and I've been a lover of libraries ever since. They're dangerous too, because as a writer, you can lose yourself in the library and never emerge, and come out 6 years later never having written a word, which is a great source of procrastination, to research and never get your real work done. But I do love libraries, and it feels I've spent half my life in them. And my mother gave me the gift of reading to us as a child, and I still remember her reading when I was very young, A. Milne's Disobedience. James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree took great care of his mother, though he was only three.
Yes.
James said to his mother, he said he, you must never go down to the end of the town without consulting me. And here's a 3-year-old lecturing his mother on how to be, which of course is delightful for a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old listener. And so the gifts that I first received to inspire me about truth and grounding and honesty and literature came from my parents.
That's lovely. And I understand your father really encouraged you to write, to physically write for things that you might want. So you had to develop a sort of argument if you wanted a kitten.
Yeah, I was dying to have a cat, and he said, he was pretty authoritarian. He said, no, you can't have one. And I said, come on, I really want a cat. And he said, no. And on the third request, he said, Larry, go upstairs to your bedroom and write me a letter and tell me why you deserve to have the cat, and who will pay for its cat food, and how you'll prevent it from having babies in the closet. And I just poured my heart into this letter as a 6-year-old, writing in block letters, and got the kitten. And from that point on, every time I wanted something, I just hit him up with another letter.
Richard, there's an important library for you in Fort Smith, isn't there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So growing up in Smith, we had the Mary Kaiser Library. Can I tell you a quick story about the power of a library? So remember 1989 when Metallica came out with the video 1? Do. Somebody was cranking Metallica on the way here. I was like, I got to tell the story. This is how powerful Metallica is. Changing lives one song at a time. So when we saw that video in 1989, Metallica 1, you can go home and watch it later. It was mysterious, and it was great, and it was epic, and it was just, the hair was great, the look was great, they meant business. You knew this was a new Metallica right out of the gates. They came out swinging. And I remember in the video 1, there's a reference to a movie, but it doesn't tell you which one at all. My buddy Junior Mercury hates that I tell the story, but I'm going to tell it anyways because I love him. And Junior Mercury came by on a skidoo. This is how we did it in '89. He came by with his mullet and his rat tail and a couple pinch hickeys, and he was like, "What was that movie in that Metallica video?" I'm like, I don't even know. Like, they should have it in the credits, don't you think? Right? And so we went to school on Monday, and we spoke to our English instructor, Mr. Bates, and we were like, "Hey, Mr. Bates, did you see that Metallica video 1?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, it was the best. Saw it on the Power Hour." I'm like, what was that video? Like, remember the movie? He goes, oh, that's Dalton Trumbo's. It's based on his book, Johnny Got His Gun. And Junior was just like, he never read a book in his life, right? I mean, he read Mad Magazine and Cracked and Heavy Metal and Savage Sword of Conan, right? But he was like, okay, sorry, what? That's based on that movie's based on a book. He's Johnny Got His Gun. He goes, let's go. So we hopped on our scooters, played hooky, went to the Mary Kaiser Library. That's how we rolled in '89. We're like, gotta go, Gypsies of the Wind. So we go to Mary Kaiser Library, and I can't remember her name, the head librarian. Jerry Miltenberger is literally opening up, and we're like, woof, right? Our mullets are just flapping in the wind, just whistling like the aurora, right? And we show up, and we're like, Mrs. Miltenberger, do you have Johnny, what was it called? Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. She goes, that is a great book. Let's go inside. Gentlemen, let's have a look. So she goes through, it's before the internet, right? The big card thing. And she goes, no, we don't have it, but we have something called interlibrary loan. And if you sign here, they have it in Yellowknife. It says they got it in Yellowknife. And so he's like, okay, how much? For how much? How much? Right? Because we all worked at Kelly's gas station, $14 an hour, free hoagies, right? And so he was like, he was like, how much does it cost? She goes, it's all free. He goes, what? She goes, it's all free. It'll probably be here, was it Monday? It'll be here Friday. And he goes, like, how long can I hold on? Can I just keep it? She goes, you can't just keep it, but it's free. It's called interlibrary loan. Do you have a library card? And he's like, no. And she goes, oh, no problem. He goes, how much? She goes, it's free. And he goes, what do you mean it's free, right? None of this made sense to this Cro-Mag named Junior Mercury. Me and my big top upper lip was just getting sweaty with excitement because I was like, this is so awesome that Junior's being baptized and welcomed into the public library system. And so he filled out this card, handed it in, and sure enough, Friday, he's like, dude, I got a phone call from Jerry Miltenberger. Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. Oof, played hooky, went back, he got it. And I saw Jerry Miltenberger decades later, back and forth, in Fort Smith. I said, Mrs. Miltenberger? And she goes, Rich, it's Jerry, right? You're 45 now. We can use you'll always be Mrs. Miltenberger to me. I said, remember that book? And she goes, Johnny Got His Gun, Dalton Trumbo. I said, did Junior Mercury ever return it? She went, nope. And that is the ultimate compliment to any author, is when your book develops legs and a librarian lets it slide. And gets stolen. Yeah, and gets stolen. That's the ultimate chef's kiss. So anyways, I just want to raise my hands with utmost respect to Jerry Miltenberger and Junior Mercury. And I want to say something, I think it was one of the organizers told me a long time ago, when Trump got elected, there was a quiet meeting. Now, whoever told me this is in the room right now, and I'm going to gossip. So this is how important libraries are. When Trump was originally elected, libraries in Western Canada sent everything they could to the librarians in Eastern Canada. Librarians in Eastern Canada sent everything they could for backup Western Canada. Librarians in the United States sent everything they could up to Canada for backup. Canada, secretly, on the Kimooch, that's Cree for on the sneak. I love how librarians are always on the sneak. And I heard, out of all conferences, it's the librarians, oh God, I broke it. It's the librarians who party the hardest. Is that true? I think that's true. Anyways, so isn't that amazing that when Trump was elected, the librarians knew they're going to come for the truth first. But the librarians will always have our backs. Masi Cho, thank you very much. Okay, wait. To the person who told me that in the room, let out a quick whistle if what I've said is true. Did you hear it? It was a whistle. It was a whistle. It's all true. I didn't lie. I didn't fib for once. Okay, one more time because I don't think people are. If whoever told me that is in the room, can you just let out a quick whistle? Right on. Here we go. Masi Cho, thank you.
I have to ask if it's still true that if you don't return a library book, you don't graduate? You can't cross the stage? Oh, maybe that's only Queens. Okay, sorry. What then now is, and Esi, I do want to ask you about libraries. In fact, if you have a library story, just feel free.
I'm struck by how we all have such a strong memory of that childhood library that forged our love of reading. For me, it was the Shaganappi branch of the Calgary Public Library. which was maybe about like a 8-minute drive from my home. And my mother was a registered nurse. She was a geriatric nurse, and so she worked nights. And her only time really to have to herself was on Saturday afternoons when she could kind of decompress. And so my father would pile me and my siblings into the car and drive us to the Shelagh branch of the library. And I think it was his way of, he's taking the kids for the day, but he doesn't really have to deal with us because he just kind of turns us loose and we run off into the stacks. And I just remember the look of the kind of brown carpet and this sort of very low-ceilinged brown building that you kind of entered through this strange tunnel. It was very, it felt very foreboding, but very exciting, the anticipation. And then just going in, and to the left was the children's section, and then to the right was, sort of, you've got history and fiction. And I just remember being lost for hours, and I would just get so excited seeing titles, and every single week I would come out with a pile of books like that, knowing that I would return the next weekend, and there was no hope that I would ever finish reading all of these books, but every week I would take out, like 15 new books and just try and race through them. But I remember one of the kind of more magical things about it was that my father and the librarians, I guess, if I think about it, didn't really sort of care or police what we were reading. So I remember taking out Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews and all these horror novels by Dean Koontz, and just, I was like 10, and, locking them away and reading them, and my eyes popping out of my head, and just, oh my gosh. And but finding it kind of like this delicious transgression, right? Like that this was maybe the only place in your whole life that you were allowed to have such freedom of choice. And I read so widely. And I just remember the sense of great freedom. And it's hard to kind of, I guess, gauge how you're aging. It's this ineffable thing. You're getting older. You see it. Others see it. But you can't really track it in the moment. But there's something about a library and being in that space that is maybe one of the few things that offers that kind of... you see a picture of yourself as you start to move from the children's section to the teen section, from the teen section to the adult section, and you feel a sense of pride in that progress and a sense of your own experiences being mirrored back through the books that you read. It's a very powerful memory that sits with me, and I'm convinced that this is one of the formative things for me becoming a writer, is the Shelagh branch of the Calgary Public Library.
Larry, you have a character in The Illegal named Ivernia Beach, who is a volunteer librarian in her 80s, and she gets a bit of a scam going that's a real act of FU. Can you talk about that?
Well, I had so much fun with Ivernia. She's in a lot of trouble. She's getting old, and she's caused a serious car accident, which has set in motion an investigation by the authorities in the city she lives in, not only to strip her possibly of her driver's license and her car, but also to strip her of her liberty and force her to live in supervised conditions. And her son, who's nasty, is advocating for the same so he can take control of her resources. So she's in a really difficult spot, and the one way she's been advised is sort of advocate for her right to continue living free of interference is to show that she's working, and she can't get a job, so she starts volunteering in the local library, and there are a lot of undocumented people who've shown up in this city that she's working in, and so she just starts handing out free library cards and without requiring them to prove that they're residents of the city or that they have identification, and this is her one sort of, as you say, one sort of FU and an opportunity to rebel against the system and to still to maintain the fiction that she's gainfully employed and therefore deserves to guard her freedom. I had a lot of fun with that. And of course, libraries are not just a place to advocate and to get together as we are here and to read and research and write, but they're also a place for many to get out of the damn cold and to sit peacefully and to maybe connect online to somebody that you have no way of connecting to. And I've been in many libraries around the world and just admired how many people were gathering just to get out of the elements and to be somewhere safe where they're probably not going to get mugged and can use a bathroom and can get online and just feel comfortable and safe. And so that's really vital too. And I guess I was trying to draw that picture in creating the character Ivernia Beach.
Ivernia has an amazing friendship, a sort of almost platonic relationship. Well, I guess it is, obviously, with a much younger man. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, she develops this very loving friendship with a young man in his 20s whose name is Keita Ali, who's one of the fastest marathoners in the country that he's just had to flee as genocide is erupting in his country, and he's come as a black man and as an undocumented refugee to hide in one of the richest countries in the world that does not want him and is promising to deport refugees to their almost certain death. And so he's running in the streets of the city to make his living, because if he wins a race, a half marathon or a 10K or a marathon, he'll pocket a few $1,000s, and that's his way of staying alive while he's living as an undocumented refugee in a very wealthy nation. And so they happen to meet while she has a traffic accident and he's running by. And so she asks him his name, and he doesn't want to identify himself, so he just says his name is Roger Bannister. And they go from there. Yeah, it was fun to draw. Sometimes some of the most beautiful friendships and connections are between people of different generations. It takes a lot of the risk and the danger out of a relationship often, and I was quite interested in exploring a relationship between a very young man and a very old woman and the love that they create between them.
Esi, it's been noted, and certainly in the Gillers citation that I mentioned, that you find the extraordinary people who are so often just footnotes in history. And I wonder if there was a literal footnote that began a story for you in your own writing.
Yeah. For Washington Black, that whole novel did come out of a footnote. I guess years earlier, I was a big fan of Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian writer, and he had written a story called, I think it was the Improbable Tom Castro, the Improbable Imposter Tom Castro, and it was about this man who had been enslaved as a young boy and had somehow ended up in the household of this aristocratic family and was helping this man who was claiming to be a part of this family, an outsider, with this ruse in which he was essentially trying to I guess, insinuate himself into the fold so that he could inherit their fortune. And I remember thinking, this is such an extraordinary story. The character was a kind of, I guess, a trickster figure, very wily. And I thought Borges had made the whole thing up. It was a very kind of classical Borgesian tale with a lot of sleight of hand, and I really loved it. But I remember reading, I don't even know what it was now, I can't even think of it, but there was a footnote in which the character from that story, who was a man called Andrew Bogle, was mentioned in this footnote. And I remember thinking, that's a real person? That's very strange, but not really looking into it, just earmarking it. And then several years later, I was walking through the portrait gallery in London, the British Portrait Gallery, and suddenly I was in this room, and there were all of these hand drawings of figures from that particular footnote. So Andrew Bogle, Roger Tichborne, who was a man who had died, but whose mother refused to believe that he had died, and had reached out, sent letters all throughout the world, and then gotten a note from Tom Castro saying, "I am your son." So there was a picture of Tom Castro, Roger Tichborne, and all of these people who'd been involved in this crazy affair, which actually was called the Tichborne Claimant Affair, and it was litigation that dragged on for almost 30 years, and was, I guess, until the 90s, kind of the longest series of criminal trials that had ever been run in England to that time. So Andrew Bogle was an enslaved man, or enslaved as a boy on a plantation in Jamaica, and he had been stolen off that plantation by a member of the Tichborne household and brought to live in England. He was a page boy for Sir Edward Tichborne, and then became his valet, and ended up traveling with Sir Edward all around Europe. He visited Paris, he was in Italy, and lived this tremendously different life to the one that he would have imagined for himself as a boy working, or I guess toiling on a plantation in Jamaica. And so I started to think I was going to write a novel about the Tichborne Claimant Affair, which I'm glad I did not do, because Zadie Smith very brilliantly published one, I think, about 2 years ago. It was a great book. But the more I kind of sat with Bogle's story, the more, maybe it's the way my brain works, I just started thinking less about all of the, what became for me the distractions of all of those trials, which felt like they were endless, and I couldn't figure out a way to contain them within the narrative, like the size of the narrative that I wanted to tell. And I came really to focus on the early years of Bogle and that transition that he would have made from plantation life to, going to live in a completely different world, among completely different people, in a totally different culture, and with a completely different mores and food and language, and having been wrenched out of that. And I thought, that's really my story. And he became Washington Black, and it was more taking that central identity and then putting it into a totally different narrative to the one of the Tichborne claimant. But I feel like so much of my work is having a curiosity about a footnote in a book, and then following that and seeing where it takes me.
Larry, you're nodding, and Richard, you're nodding. This is serendipity is important.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where has it led you?
Well, I want to end with a good story, because remember we got the lecture about 11 o'clock and 10:30, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to tell you. Okay.
I've got my eye on the clock. Don't worry.
I know you do. You're the ultimate bouncer, eh? Just Canada's bouncer, Shelagh Rogers, eh? Keeping us all honest, eh? Remember Patrick Swayze's line, "Be nice until you don't have to be nice anymore," eh? So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to just risk something. How many of you growing up had invisible friends? Raise your hands, raise them. Look at all the hands. So we got maybe 40%, maybe 50%. So before COVID, when I would speak at teachers' conferences quite a bit, it was always the teachers. They would always, when I say, who here growing up had an invisible friend? For some reason, out of all the groups, it was always teachers, be 60%, 65%. And we would have these microphone stands, and I said, anybody who wants to get up and tell us about your invisible friend or friends, can you please just open? And teachers just chomping at the bit, right, to show and tell. And I remember there was a lady, and I'm so sorry I did not catch her name. She went up to the mic and she goes, "Have I got a story for you?" I said, "Oh, let's go." She said, "Grew up on a farm. I hated summers. because everybody left and it was work, 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 all the time work. One day a little boy came to me on the farm. His name was Tommy. He was my best friend, and I was the only one who could see him. My parents never made fun. There was always an extra little seat at the table. There was a little teddy bear in the seat belt in the little truck that we would drive around on the acreage, and Tommy was allowed to sit there. And at the end of the day, when we would talk, we would ask, Tommy, and how was your day? And I would listen to what Tommy said, and then I would translate. Well, Tommy said that he didn't like that, da-da-da-da-da. He got scared when you yelled at the chicken, da-da-da-da-da. And nobody ever made fun of me. Nobody ever questioned anything. When school started, Tommy would walk me with the dog to the bus, and I'd say, come to class with me. And he said, I'm not allowed to leave here, but you go and you learn everything you can. Come back and teach me. I want to learn math and social studies and everything you're learning. Tell me about your friends. And son of a gun, I would go and I'd come back. And when the bus was coming, I could see Tommy waving and I could see the dog. And then Tommy and I and the dog would walk back to the house. And at night, I would teach class and Tommy would listen. And this went on for quite some time, many months. And one day, she goes, it must have been a Sunday. My mom had her big silver bowl, and I think she was making crepes or pancakes. Must have been a Sunday. And she said to me, my girl, you haven't told me about Tommy in a little while. Is Tommy here? You know, my eyes aren't so good anymore. Is Tommy here? And I said to her, oh, Mom, I have to tell you something. And she said, oh, what? Tommy told me he was getting ready to pass away. And she said, I'll never forget. My mom put the silver bowl down. She came around the table and she sat next to me and she said, my girl, why would a little boy tell you he was getting ready to pass away? What's going on? And she said, oh no, it's not a bad thing, Mom. Tommy sat me down. He said, I need to tell you something. I'm getting ready to pass away. And I got so sad. This is my best friend. I said, why do you have to pass away? Your life's just starting. He said, I'm getting ready to pass away so I can come back as a baby. So maybe all these invisible friends you had growing up were babies waiting to be born. Isn't that incredible? Let's hear it for Tommy. Isn't that something? Yeah, I love that. I love the power of a story. I think about that all the time. And I think that's what great stories do. They are here to remind us about what it means to be human together, celebrating the great mystery of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
This panel is called The Role of the Storyteller. Is that the role of the storyteller?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bring hope.
Yeah.
Actually,
How would you call it, Esi?
well, I was really struck by your story, Richard, because I remember so many people, myself among them, having invisible friends when we were young. But if I think about my own kids and their generation, my kids are 14 and 10, I feel like that wasn't really something that they engaged with, that there weren't a lot of invisible friends anymore. And I wonder if that has something to do with, I guess, the way we've shifted our engagement with storytelling. Like you were saying earlier, like we grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and we had like these childhoods that were, you were outside, you were creating narratives with your friends to, you're playing games, and then you have to kind of agree on the rules of the game, and this is a way of storytelling, right? And you're doing it collectively. But so much now is screen-bound and online, and I don't know if that's just a different version of storytelling, like when you're, for instance, engaging in a video game and you're playing with other players and you're having discussions. But it seems to have, at least from what I've observed, taken out this element of I guess, storytelling in the real world. This isn't something that's maybe done as much, which perhaps is a shame, or perhaps it's just a different, maybe it's just been translated or ported into something else. I don't know.
What would you say is the role, I guess, Larry?
Well, I mean, sometimes younger people or students ask me a bit about advice in this respect, and I'll just say that to write or to create, you really have to have the courage to be alone in your own head and to turn off the peripherals and just to allow yourself to soak in your own imagination. And if you're not populated directly by invisible characters, make them up. But you won't be making them up. You won't be imagining them if you're so crowded in your life and so preoccupied with all the external stimuli that you can't have access to all those surprises lingering inside your own soul. And so just having the time, as Alice Munro used to say, to look out the window, is so vital to people of any age and generation who want to create, and to have the courage to just shut the world out and see what you've got inside you. So it's something I like to tell aspiring writers.
I am looking at the clock. I feel really cool now that you've called me a bouncer. That just
Bounce us.
I'm glad you don't. I'm glad you don't think it's casting against type. I really appreciate that. But I want to make sure if there are questions that we make sure that we hear from you as well. And I know it's always hard to be the first, so if you could pretend you're the second, that would be just awesome. Right in the back. You're going to ask it into the microphone just so that we can all hear you. Thank you.
I feel embarrassed now because it's a tiny personal question, which is I want to ask Lawrence Hill if he went to Overland School.
No, I went to a school called Cassandra Boulevard Public School, but it wasn't far from Overland, and I was a runner, and I often ran by Overland School, so I know exactly where it is, in Don Mills.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the things that's always fascinated me when I've read you telling about your childhood, talking about the Don Mills Library, where I also went, and I went to Overland School for 2 years. But that whole idea of a person of color, a mixed race person in Don Mills, it just seems like such a... I'm sure you stood out. It seems like an odd place for you to have grown up, and I'm just wondering about all that.
Well, I feel thankful for growing up in a crucible of racial ambiguity because it drove me to write. And so I'm appreciative of that background. And Don Mills today is one of the most multiracial communities in Canada, but at the time, I can assure you it was not. And I used to think about my parents fleeing a highly racialized environment in DC and thinking, thanks a lot, you moved us to Don Mills. A hard place to get grounded. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you to the panelists for all of your thoughts. I've really enjoyed the session so far. Richard, I think that's the second time I've heard you tell that story about heaven being the West Edmonton Mall, and I love it every time, so thank you always for sharing that. But you mentioned running out to buy that hand recorder, and each and every one of us has, a recording device in our hands right now. And I'm wondering how you think that, obviously it has changed how stories are captured, and it empowers everyone to share or to capture and share their own stories. And I think at one point, probably around the Arab Spring 2010, we thought that would change the world in positive ways, but clearly it's changed it for the good and the bad. And I guess I'm curious from all of the panelists, or you too, Sheila, as well, how you think these devices have changed what it means to be a storyteller.
Can I start? Now, is my mic working? Is it? Are you serious? You can really hear it? Okay. So I'm really lucky because I get to call home all the time. And I have a really tough auntie. Her name's Marlene Evans. She's tough as nails. She known me her whole life. I love her absolutely, completely. But she's tough. And I called her the other day because the North has changed forever. I used to be a guard for the RCMP, and that just was with alcohol and gambling. This is before the hard drugs that are affecting all communities. And I called her and I just said, Auntie, what broke us? We're broken forever now. There's no going back to what we knew in the 70s and the 80s. What broke us? And she said, drugs and technology. Without even blinking, it was just It was like she'd been waiting years for somebody to ask. And I said, well, I get the drugs. Tell me about the technology. She said, who visits anymore? Who visits anymore? She goes, heaven help you if you show up at your best friend's house and you didn't book it first. Right? Everyone's busy. She goes, when I used to come to your house in the 70s to watch The Edge of Night, what did your mom say? What did Rosa say? I said, my mom always said, oh, you boys, we have company, come listen. It was all at the supper table. Love stories, makeup stories, breakup stories, good stories, haunted stories, good medicine stories, the Kimooch stories, who was single and ready to mingle, right? Right? We have a guy in our community called the divorce inspector. They get divorced and he inspects them. You know what I mean? There's another guy they call Earl the Pearl. Hey? Anyways, it was all there at the supper table, right? And it was there that we were warned who the children hunters were, who the wife beaters were, who the bootleggers were. It was all there, out in the open, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, she goes, when I go visiting, where's the kids? In their room, door closed, in the basement, playing video games with their friends. So it's still here at the supper table, but the kids are not being warned. And they're not being welcomed into the beauty of who we are as Dene people, as Northerners. Even hunters now, when they go in the bush, they bring Starlink. So they're still playing backgammon on Facebook and all this stuff. So they're not on the land, of the land, learning from the land, because the land is one of our greatest teachers, of course. So drugs and technology, Richard, have broken us forever. So we have a responsibility to bring back the good visiting, like what we're doing here. So I bet you if this place, under every full moon, were to host an evening of good visiting, it'd be packed, because people are starving for stories. So I'm going to double dog rib dare all of you to bring back good visiting in your own families. Bring it back. Host a feast under the next full moon. Host a little giveaway. And you'll see it's contagious, right? And to be hosted, you have to host. So start, right? There's so many easy recipes on YouTube. There's no excuses anymore, right? But bring back that good visiting and get the children back at the table so that they listen, they learn, because they're starving too for their community. And we have a responsibility to honor that. So, Masi Cho, thank you. Yeah.
Larry, do you want to talk about technology and social media and recording devices?
Well, I know this is very prevalent in Indigenous and Black communities. The whole notion of oral history and of recording this, or documenting, or hearing, perhaps transcribing the stories of your ancestors. And my folks, back around 1980, created the Ontario Black History Society, and the first thing that they did was to send volunteers like me into the community to record the stories of old folks in the Black communities of Southern Ontario where we were living, and the danger, of course, was that when they died, those stories would go and be forever lost, because not enough work had been done to document those stories in traditional ways that other people's stories get documented. And it's a beautiful thing to sit down in the home of a 90-year-old who still got her mind, or even half of her mind, and to take down those stories and hear the ways they talk and the things they have to say. Gosh, I remember one fellow whose name was Alvin Duncan, who grew up and whose parents and grandparents were in Oakville, Ontario. His grandparents had come as fugitive slaves into Oakville, Ontario, which is a town a little bit to the west of Toronto. And he told me about how growing up he'd seen a KKK demonstration to come into town to break up a pending marriage between a Black World War I veteran and his white fiancée. And so he had witnessed this Ku Klux Klan demonstration coming into Oakville to prevent this marriage from taking place. It was amazing. How would I possibly have learned about that if not recording, the recollections of an old man whose stories would otherwise have been lost? And so I'm a great believer in oral histories and all the wealth that they can generate.
Esi?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, I was thinking about what you were saying about 2020, and, in particular thinking of all of those very graphic videos that were emerging then, and it seemed like it was one after the other, culminating in, of course, the killing of George Floyd, and how it really took, I guess, these horrible narratives that we were now able to see, because I think everybody always knew that this was happening. People from Black communities had always known, but and it had been written about. But for us to see these horrible stories emerging, and for then mainstream media outlets to pick up these stories, and then for that to be the thing that the intention was to spark real reform. It's horrible that things had to get to that place. But, I really feel like storytelling is maybe sort of the only thing that creates, that's able to change the world. I think the way that our minds process facts, it's very difficult to look directly at something, and once you've seen it, it's very difficult to hold all of the details in one's head unless this is done through a narrative for you. A journalist lays out, piecemeal exactly how something is how it functions, exactly what the details of a certain event were, and then we're able to retain it because it's been laid out sequentially, and we're able to maybe feel a little bit about what the victims were feeling. Maybe there's interviews, and then we sort of can see the shape of that, and feel those feelings and emotions, and then really come to a place where we think, well, that's wrong. This shouldn't be. I recently was reading, there was a whole kind of expose in the New York Times about, I think, volunteer fire brigades in the States, and how they were discouraged from firefighting with masks on. And so many men in their 20s and 30s were finding themselves with, with various kinds of cancers, lung cancers, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, all of this. And I would say within a week and a half of that story being published, there was a huge outcry, and now they've changed the laws, and these men are, they have to wear masks, and their employees will provide them with masks. I think the next step is getting insurance to cover the care for what these men are going through. But, that's a very, that's storytelling creating change. It's like people needed to see the various steps of I guess the whole contour of what was going on here, the various details, and to have it laid out for them, for people to first recognize that there was an issue, and then to have a public outcry and say, this is fundamentally, morally wrong. And this is the power of storytelling, as I see it. And I've used, this is journalism, but I think that fiction, just reading about the life of somebody whose existence is completely different from your own, and being able to still feel, I guess, a great empathy for their plight, or trying to understand their motives when they're doing things that seem reprehensible. I think that this exercises a very important muscle that we all need, to have working for us if we're to live together in societies in which we have such different experiences, but have to coexist.
To echo those beautiful words, Esi, I think that when we have the chance to write something that's authentic and surprising and real and honest and memorable, and get that down between the covers of a book, and give that to somebody, you've given them a friend for life. Mm-hmm. And that person will carry a little piece of that story, even if they forget some of the details, in their soul forever. And they're walking with that book like they're walking with an old friend. And especially if you can hit a young reader, you know how it is. If you're 15 or 17 and you find something you love, you'll never forget that story that you ate up when you were a teenager. And so that's a great gift of allyship and friendship and community as well, just to give a reader a lifelong friend, which is your book.
That was a great question. Thank you. Thank you so much. Here's a question, and here's another question, and I think that may be all we have time for. You never know.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed the discussion. And I have a question for the writers about the role of archives and library collections as sources of inspiration. I guess that's a link to, how much research creative writers do or need to do this day and age, and how much, whether you have experiences of using collections like that to inspire or encourage your own creativity, and that sort of the role of memory in that process.
I'll just say very briefly, my first novel was called The Second Life of Samuel Tyne, and it was really the story of a man who it was dealing with the history of black migration from Oklahoma to central and northern Alberta. Freed slaves had come up to establish homesteads in both Alberta and Saskatchewan and in BC, and had found them because they were disenfranchised in Oklahoma. They were prey to Klansmen. They were denied the vote. They couldn't sort of establish ownership of property. So the government of Canada wanted to, settle the Western provinces, and went down and had a large sort of campaign called the Last Best West, in which American farmers and ranchers were invited up to settle the land, which has its own. We could go down that road, but. They were not expecting that black settlers would be part of this migration, and several, townships were established. One was called Amber Valley, and I very much centered the narrative around this particular history. But it's interesting because it's a history that being from Alberta, I was born and raised in Calgary, I had not at all heard of this history. It was not something that ever came up in the curriculum in Calgary. And the way I came to this story was that I went and studied down at Johns Hopkins for my master's degree, and I was dating a boy who's now my husband, and he was studying at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And so I would go probably most weekends and every summer and live with him in his apartment in Charlottesville. And this is the University of Virginia. It's Thomas Jefferson's University on the Hill. But I remember going with him, and I would just go into the university library there and just go through the stacks. It was just such a rich, deep, memorable, it felt like there was a whole world in there. And I remember coming across, it was like a new history of Alberta, or I think that was what it was called. And I thought, what is this doing here? I remember thinking, this seems like I've never seen such a book in Alberta. And here I was in Charlottesville, seeing this in this library, and I remember taking it out and opening it up, and there was a page of these kind of black homesteaders in northern Alberta, and I was just completely, just my breath was taken. I just could not believe what I was seeing, and I thought, why don't I know this history, and how am I finding it in Virginia? You know, of all places, this library in Virginia. But that really sparked my interest, and I found myself, when I returned to Canada, I was in the library here at the University of Victoria, and also the Central Library downtown, just trying to find out everything I could about these settlements. And I feel like that novel, as well as all of my others, these are books that are very much born in libraries. They're books that came of books and an exposure to books and an accidental stumbling across various histories, which I would never have, encountered otherwise.
By the way, Esi and I did our graduate work at the same
Yes, that's
university at Johns Hopkins, and the first time that I think we met in person, you were with Stephen on your way to Hopkins, and you stopped
That's
in
right.
and visited me in Ontario to chat about what Hopkins would be like. That was such a great visit.
And
that
you were
was
so generous.
Some years ago.
Yeah.
And I just like, and of course, I you can tell from reading Esi's work that how much time she spent in archives and libraries, and I have too. And just a quick story. When I was researching the Book of Negroes, I was trying to create this character and write in the voice of this 18th century African woman whose name is Aminata. And she's been, abducted from her village in what is a country now known as Mali and sent in the 18th century into slavery in the province of South Carolina. It's still a British province. And eventually she gets free and becomes literate and is dying to know where she's come from and how to get back, to the village from which she was ripped when she was pubescent. And she comes upon these maps, and the maps are a ludicrous depiction of Africa. They show elephants, in lieu of towns, and naked people instead of towns and rivers, and the maps are just a total European fantasy of what Africa might actually have been. And so she's so insulted to see these maps, and I was trying to figure out whether I was reading an authentic voice or if it could really be that an 18th century African woman would be insulted to see these maps, and would it be appropriate or not to give her a moment of rage and encounter these maps. And finally, in the University of Toronto library government map section, I started looking at these old maps, these 18th century European depictions of Africa, and I found dozens and dozens of old maps. I'd never seen them before. They're fascinating and troubling and rich and horrific. And at any rate, in looking at these maps, I'd found a quote by Jonathan Swift, who wrote, satirizing these maps in 1733. So geographers in Afric maps with savage pictures fill their gaps, and o'er uninhabitable downs place elephants for want of towns. And so he's satirizing these maps in 1733, which gave me license to give her a measure of anger in finding these maps too. And I would never have had that idea. I would never have come across a way to see these maps if I hadn't spent time in archives and libraries, including in the government map section of the University of Toronto Robarts Library. So I feel very indebted to libraries and archives and spent a great deal of time in them.
Did you ever hear that saying, every time an elder passes, a library closes? So my elders have always been my universities. Yeah. Esi, thank you.
Masi Cho. Yeah. There was a hand. And there it is.
Thank you for this really great conversation. This is a question for all of the panelists. I'm wondering, with the state of the world today, if you feel there are any stories that we desperately need that are not being told.
There are infinite stories. And I think just last night I was reminded of the genocide in Sudan that very few people are paying attention to. Certainly very few people in Canada are paying attention to, but I think every one of us has a story that could be told and should be told, and that we could dredge up from our family histories or from the stories that we've come to know about. And there are infinite stories, and I guess the challenge is to get to as many of them as we can, as readers and as writers. I think there's an infinite number of stories that need to be told, because we all have them inside our own hearts and inside our own family histories.
Do you want to answer that one too? Or?
I'll tell you a good story.
And then I'm going to make Esi come after you again.
So I have permission to tell this story. My old boss, her name was Marlena Dolan in Penticton, British Columbia. One night, remember when there were those fires outside of Naramata? Long time, maybe over 20 years ago. We were in Peachland where she stayed, and at night we would go and sit on chairs, and we could see the helicopters doing their best to do these water drops before the sun set. And they were doing a great job. And one day we were watching this, and she said, "Did I ever tell you what happened to me when I was 16 years old?" And I was like, "No, it's great. It's my boss. We're sitting here." And she said, "When I was 16 years old, my mom and dad said, 'All right, Marlena, you're 16. We're too old. We're too tired to pretend anymore. We know every night when we watch the National with Knowlton Nash, you're at the back of the hall watching and listening. From here on in, if you want to watch the National with Knowlton Nash, you can sit on the couch, but you are your own person now. You can't be late for school. You got to do your homework, and that's that. We're going to bed. Congratulations, you're 16. You can watch the National." And she said, she just couldn't get enough of the news. So that night, she was watching the National with Knowlton Nash, and he opened and he just said, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to open with some very graphic footage. This is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and Dachau, and we're going to show some footage that we've just been able to digitize and reclaim. It's very graphic. If you are a sensitive viewer, we would ask you now just perhaps to look away for the next 5 minutes. And we play this in honor of all the victims and all the lives lost, so that maybe the world will learn about how far and how brutal humanity can really be. And we honor the survivors. So here we go." And so she said, it's her birthday, and she sat down, and they open, and there's a tractor in winter rolling logs into an open pit. And she realized those weren't logs, those were people. And she said when she saw that, she felt someone wake up inside of her, and her blood exploded. And she can't remember what they showed next, but she ended up running down the hall and opening her parents' door, saying, "Why didn't the world stop and go to these places and free those?" They're saying 6 million people died. Why? What could be more important? Like, "Dad, why didn't you go and fight?" And he was like, I was just a kid. Like, we didn't know. Like, none of us knew this was happening overseas. But what about the people over there? Didn't they know what was happening? And she just would not back down. And he said, "Look, we didn't know about it. We're just trying to get to bed here. Some of us got to work in the morning. Go talk to your teachers." So she ended up tackling the principal the next morning when he was getting out of his car and said, "Why aren't you teaching this story about Auschwitz and Dachau and the death camps and 6 million people? Like, why didn't you go and stop?" And he was like, I didn't even know about it. Like, what are you talking about, right? He hadn't stayed up late to watch the National with Knowlton Nash. And so he said, "You go to the library and you read the books, and then you come back and you tell me what you learned, because we do need to start teaching this. If you're this passionate, this is what we want." So she went down to the librarian, and she was interlibrary alone, and the librarian said, "So what exactly do you want?" She said, "I want everything. I want every book. I want everything." And the librarian, it was something out of a movie, the librarian was like, "You want," and she goes, "I want everything." And she read it. Her dad had to build shelves in the basement, and she didn't return any of the books. Remember when we were kids? And we had a crush on somebody and they lived in Ontario, and you had to wait till 11:01 because it was cheaper? Remember those days? Do you remember that? Oh, you You guys are just babies. You don't remember. Your belly buttons are still wet. Hey, your little knee bones are still soft. Okay, in the 80s, when you had a crush on somebody and they lived south of the northern border, the phone plans were cheaper after 11 o'clock at night. And she would call survivors. At 11:01, she would track down people and ask them, what was it like? I read about your testimony and I have more questions. And she was always searching for a number. She was always searching for a number. So she got 3 jobs. She was the first person to get a passport. And when she was in her early 20s, she went to one of these tours. So they pick you up, they put you up at a hostel, pick you up at the bus, and they drive you through the gates, and they leave you there for several hours, and you're free to wander. And that's exactly what she did. And she showed up, and she had one of these. She had notepads, she had books, and as she was pulling up to one of the death camps, she knew, she'd studied it. She said, that's where the showers were, and that's where the dentist was, where they saved the gold from people's fillings, and that's where they kept the children. She knew everything already. She knew it, right? But something wouldn't let her in through those gates. Everybody else got to go in except her. She was not allowed in. There was something that would not let her in. And she thought, I've saved up all my money. I got my passport. I've come all this way. Why can't I go into this place? This is ludicrous. She didn't understand what was going on. So she ended up going for a long walk, and she ended up going into the town, and there was a little restaurant, a little pub that had just opened. And she walked in, and she must have been, 20, 21. And a gentleman was there, and he was wiping down the bar and getting everything set up. And he said, "Come in, welcome." He said, "American?" He said, "No, Canadian." "Oh, come on in, Canadian, come on in. Have a drink. And it's on me." And she said, "Oh no, I don't drink." He said, "Today, you have a drink. Have a drink." She thought, "Well, why not? I'm 21 years old." So she has a drink. She doesn't know what it was. It was liquid fire. She was like, wow. And he was setting up the bar, and he said, "Tell me why you've come here. Why did you come all the way from Canada?" And she said, honestly, when I was 16 years old, I saw some footage that I really wish I hadn't seen, but it changed my life forever. And I've been obsessed since I was 16, and I've been looking for a number, and I don't actually know why I'm here, but I'm here, and something is not letting me through the gates. And the gentleman said, "Do you want me to tell you why you're here?" And she goes, "Could you please? That would help me, because I spent so much money. I've got my passport, and I've come all this way." He goes, "You're here because you were murdered here. This is where you died in your last life. And when you saw that footage, it was probably you that you saw being rolled into those open graves. It's like this every day. Hundreds of people come, like the salmon. They're coming home. They don't know why, but they're being drawn here. You've come to the place to touch where you were killed in your last life. And now that you come here, they're not letting you in because it's time to live again. It's time to dance again. Have babies, live a beautiful life, have your own family. You've returned, your work is done. It's time to live." And she never went back. She went to Canada, returned all those books, thousands of books, right? She burnt all her notepads, and she had the most beautiful life. And she said, that's how it is sometimes. We're born remembering our past lives, and some of us are haunted looking for numbers because that was hers. So I think, to answer your question, there's not a lot that we can do globally, but there's a lot we can do locally. So do your best, live a good life, right? And trust that when your work is done, right, we'll all be together at the great West Edmonton Mall in the sky one day, hey? But let's continue to do the good work, and let's keep up that great visiting, and let's keep, investing in each other, telling our truth like what Auntie and Uncle said. Let's keep telling our truth, living your truth, sharing, risking courage, risking those beautiful stories. So Masi Cho, thank you for listening.
Thank you all for your stories. My soul certainly feels like it has a balm now listening to each of you. So thank you, Larry. Thank you, Esi. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Sheila.
Hey, great job. Great job.